I'm going to talk about developer productivity. First, a little bit about me. I found it really hard to just put one thing there. As you can see, it's because I typically wear many hats. I used to be a software engineer, later on data engineer. On some occasions, I'm still a data engineer, platform engineer, architect at some consultancy engagements. I take on that role, team lead, again, some engagements I did, but I'm also product owner of Conveyor. Next to that, everybody who knows me, I'm a big fan of culture. So every time something goes wrong within Conveyor, I'm the person who said, like, how can we bring this into our culture so it doesn't happen again? So I try to avoid like adding processes to our organization and try to solve everything with culture. Last but not least, I'm also CTO of Data Minded. It means I've been here quite a while by now. So before we actually start on the content, I want to see like what is developer productivity and why is it actually important? And what do we tend to do nowadays if you want to ask and introduce something, you ask ChatGPT, give me the definition of developer productivity. And typically what happens is ChatGPT starts generating and mumbling about all these things, and then we do always the same. I guess everybody does the same. Summarize this in one sentence, right? It's the equivalent of explaining like a five, right? And I think if we then look at like what's developer productivity, it talks about efficiency, right? It talks about efficiency of software developers bringing high quality code for valuable solutions to production. So it's a measure about like how efficient we are as data engineer or data teams. How efficient are data teams within our organization? And why? Why would that matter to an organization? Well, more and more companies, as you've actually seen with Luminus, are actually turning into software companies. And what do we want to do? What do we gain by actually maximizing developer productivity? Well, we get better data products, we get better products. What do we get by having better products? We get happier customers. And customers can be both internal customer or external customers. And if we have better or happier customers, what do we get as a result? We get a better business. And we all want a better business, right? And that's one part of the equation. I think there's a second part of the equation, and there's a high correlation between developer productivity and satisfaction. So why is that important? Because there's a high correlation also between satisfaction and retaining talent. So if you want to retain talent, you want to have a high developer productivity. So how do you actually measure developer productivity? I think that's a highly debated topic. So last year, McKinsey published this paper. So yes, you can measure software developer productivity. Who knows what happened? Who saw this article? Oh, at least one person, two people saw this article. So what did it do? So McKinsey published this, and it really created a storm on the internet. So everybody started complaining about like that they don't know what they're talking about. And I think this kind of summarizes it all. It's from Ken Beck. He's quite known in the productivity space. And he says the report is absolutely absurd and naive, and it's not even worth to critique it. So, you know what the funny thing has happened? He wrote actually two very long blogs critiquing that specific article. That being said, measuring these things is developer productivity is very hard, and it's actually what they all agree on. They all are saying, no matter what methodology you use, measuring developer productivity is very hard. And besides from that, there's not a single metric. So there's not one thing you can measure that actually captures everything about developer productivity. Now, if you look at all these different methodologies, then you have, I think the most known one is DORA metrics. You have another one, can't come to the name of it. But all these, they typically measure things across three different dimensions. And these dimensions are speed. How fast can I get from point A to point B. The second part is how easy is it? How easy is it to get from point A to point B? And you can have speed, but it doesn't mean it's easy, right? And the last one is actually quality. So when these three things actually live together, and you can't optimize for one, you have to look at them as a more holistic view. Like there's tension between these two, right? I can have something that's really fast, I can bring something really fast to production, but it doesn't mean it's high quality. So you want to balance these things out. So that's kind of an introduction, but because it's so hard to measure developer productivity, I would actually like to share some of the things we experienced with Conveyor and how we actually helped companies improve developer productivity. And so I have 3 challenges or 3 points in time where I said, like, here we really made a difference. And the first one actually is this picture was generated not by me. It was generated by Pascal Knapen at an event we had in February. And it kind of explains, like, how does a company look like? How does an enterprise internally look like? And he says, typically, let's be honest, a typical enterprise is a complete mess. You have way too many systems, you have way too much complexity, you have way too much technology. And it's kind of understandable, right? This is how the data landscape looks today. And personally, I often have the feeling every time we have a problem, people are just firing darts and picking random technologies and adding them to the stack. So the real first challenge we see at a lot of organizations is technical fragmentation. Too much technology. And what does that actually cause? It causes high technical cognitive load on people, right? It makes it very very hard to actually get anything done within these organizations. So how do we solve this? Well, the solution isn't that hard, right? The easiest thing to do is standardize. Stop adding more tools. Pick a couple of them and stick with them. Standardize on one side and productionize on one thing, like building platforms, hide away certain levels of technology, make it easy for end users. Build paved roads to make things happen in production. We've seen this actually, like, again, in the example that I give, make it really easy to go from ideation all the way into production. The question is, where do you actually standardize on? And I think there's tension there. And I think, like, somebody asked the question, like, are you never hindered by Conveyor? Are you never limited by Conveyor? And I think that's really the good question to ask. It's a hard question to ask, but it's all about, like, where do you standardize on, right? If you standardize too narrowly as an engineer, you feel locked up. You will feel you don't have room to move. You won't have room for innovation. So my advice would there, standardize on something that's not a little bit higher. Try to find the right level for your organization to standardize on. That's exactly what we try to do with Conveyor. So how did we try to solve that? We didn't standardize on one particular technology, but we tried to standardize how you actually package and deploy data pipelines. And we did that actually using already an existing standard. Like, and that existing standard is Docker or container images. Next to that, we provide an easy way for actually users to build and deploy and bring things into multiple environments. Next to that, we also thought, like, okay, that's one thing to standardize on, but on the same side, you want to build libraries. You want to build, as an organization, you want to build paved roads for your use cases. And Conveyor adds that functionality as well for organizations to build their own paved roads. So that's one challenge. What's another one? Another one, and that this is something we've seen, and this is perhaps, I don't know if it's typical for the data space, we often have a lot of shared environments. Think about, like, we have one database and multiple teams working on this. We have one Hadoop cluster in the old days. Everybody working on that. We have one workflow manager and all teams deploying to that single workflow manager. And so what happens, all these teams are sometimes hindering each other. So teams go at different speeds. And so it means sometimes one team is holding back another team. and you want to avoid that at all times. So how do you solve something like this? And I'll now take a quote from Frost. It's good fences make good neighbors, right? It feels really easy, but what does it actually mean? It means that you want to put some boundaries there. You want to put boundaries around teams where they can move freely, but still collaborate and communicate with your neighbors. So don't build walls around your house, around your garden, so you can't communicate anymore, but do put boundaries in place. And we actually can translate these kind of things to software. One approach we took with Conveyor is actually create throwaway environments. So while you can still have one production environment or multiple production environments, you also create the notion of throwaway environments. So every individual data team or every individual data engineer can have their own environment where they build and deploy data products. And there they can test completely in safety if everything they're doing is working as expected. And it's exactly the same as your production environment. So it makes it really easy to know if something is working before you actually promote it to production. And that's exactly what we actually try to encourage, to build your code in isolated environments and then promote exactly that code to your central production environment. It's not the only thing we added to counter this. The second thing we added is a way to actually do remote execution. So even if you don't have this throwaway environment and you still have your own, the only thing you have is the production environment, and you do want to run something there, don't do a deployment, don't want to impact other people, we do allow remote execution in those environments as well, where directly from your code, and you can see this example here, where you just do a conveyor run and will package your existing code, run it immediately in that environment on the server, and streamline all your logs directly to your terminal, making it very easy to test if something is working or something isn't working. And so we're not the only one who are doing that, right? So that approach is actually quite, we see this more and more in the data landscape, right? This is Dolly, right? It's a clone, and nowadays I think I'm very much a fan of Snowflake and the zero copy cloning. It means you can take any database, any schema, any table, and make a zero copy clone of that. That means like you have exactly the same data that you have in production or in acceptance, and make a clone of that. And you can do all the transformation on exactly that data without impacting production at all. You create a fence around it, your own personal environment, where you can play with data, and later on you can even merge it back in. Other technologies like Delta are offering similar capabilities. So we see this approach of having transient environments or transient data environments more and more in our sector. So it's definitely something that's accelerating us by not hindering other people. Last but not least, the third example I want to give, it's something I've talked about before. I think that now you give a really nice intro, and you've helped me a lot with this already. Like as consultants, once in a while we get laptops that look like this, and sometimes I really do think it's not about security, but more about torture. And we get really completely locked down laptops where you're not admin, where you are not able to install anything. I even have a customer where if I want to install something, I have to create a ticket. At some random moment in time, the person is going to come back to me, or somebody's going to come back to me and ask for a remote session. He will then log in into my computer and install the software for me. Now that process can take an hour or a couple of days. It means I need to, after I create the ticket, I have to move away to something else. I have to start doing something else because I'm currently locked on whatever I was doing. And I have to wait sometimes a week before that software is installed. And then finally, in context, switch back to what I'm doing. As you can see, that's not a very efficient way of developing. You're wasting a lot of time. And I think this is really a solved problem already. And I think Bernard mentioned it with Gitplot, right? Since 2021, online IDEs are there. They have gained more and more traction, both open source and commercial solutions. Commercial solutions, well known, GitHub code spaces, Gitpod commercial solutions. You also have open source variants like Coder and DevPod. Right? Perhaps one thing that is mentioned, has been mentioned before, is in data, it's important to have access to data. And Bernard mentioned it as well, like on the local machine, you don't have access to your data, but in his Gitpod environment of Luminus, he does have access to data. And so whenever you choose one of these solutions in the data space and you know that accessing data is important, do look at a solution that allows you to connect to your local network. Right? And I think in the case of Luminus, you're actually deploying it in an AWS account that is linked to the network of Luminus itself, so they can have that data access. And how did we solve this at Conveyor? Exactly the same way. So on one side, we did a deep integration with Gitpod and code spaces, making it really easy to get from your project to an online IDE, either in Gitpod or in code spaces. Next to that, we added our own IDE. Why did we add our own? Well, it's a little bit about not every customer is able to say like, hey, yes, you take this software and then you have to add this again and buy also this and buy this as well. So we wanted it to be part of the Conveyor ecosystem. So we added it your own, and because we already run in the network of the customer, it's already deployed at the customer in its network, you could easily run these online IDEs within that same network, meaning to get access to that data, or at least there's the possibility of accessing that data. Next to that, like we also scope them again. So every IDE is limited to a project and an environment, meaning like if you have a data pipeline running for project wind energy and it's running in the optimization department environment, you can start your IDE in exactly the same environment, meaning you have exactly the same context as the pipelines you're developing for. And because we control the entire ecosystem, we can do some things that some commercial tools cannot, like do special things for data. For example, do Snowflake SSO, like enabling Snowflake to through single sign-on to users to their IDE connect through single sign-on directly to Snowflake. It's something that's hard and almost impossible to do from other commercial tools without deep integration with Snowflake. So if I take a quick recap on things that have really helped us as customers to improve productivity, it's standardization. It reminds me of all these the stories of all the models and all the libraries that have been built in Luminus. The only way how you can actually go fast is standardize. Standardize on something and stick to it. Don't add technical complexity that you don't need. The second is establish boundaries. Making sure every team can work slowly, independently, and is not dependent on other teams. Last but not least, provide the right tools to your engineers. And that comes down to providing high quality workstations. So how do we measure productivity at Conveyor? And what have our experiences been? So we've done a bunch of things. So we measure DORA. DORA stands for DevOps, Research, and something, assessment. Yeah, that's it. So what does DORA measure? It measures a couple of outcomes and impacts. It measures your deployment frequency. It measures the time from a commit to get all the way into production. It measures how often deployment leads to a failure, and then how long it actually takes to resolve that failure. This is typically the things that the DORA measures, and I don't know if everybody read the book Accelerate, but it's all very nicely explained in that. Next to that, we also use, we have actually usage metrics and adoption metrics. And this does help us to spot trends. It's not the thing that actually drives us to action. It's often a good conversation starts to go to a customer and say like, hey, we see this team is not doing that. There might be a very good reason to do so. It's not the thing that's leading. If I think like what's leading us to improve productivity, it's not the quantitative measurements, it's the qualitative measurements. It's actually talking to people, listening to what people need. It's asking people really like, how does your day-to-day look like? What's holding you back to go faster? Like, where are you spending your time? What things in your processes are causing friction? And asking people those questions, and then the only thing you have to do is listen. And the more interviews you do and the more people you talk to, the more you will learn for a certain organization. These are the point of friction that exist. And once you know what these point of frictions are, you can actually start looking how to improve those. It sounds very easy, and it actually is. And it's way easier than trying to put really quantitative metrics on everything and trying to get that out of your Jira system, get that out of your GitHub, or try to get all these measurements really quantitative is really hard. Just talking to people, it's really easy. And I want to actually close with just saying like, hey, all these frameworks on productivity and all these tools you can add, including Conveyor, to increase productivity, yes, they help. But I think nothing actually is better than building a strong culture, building a strong engineering culture with a can-do attitude, right? But next to that, beside that, you also need a clear direction, making sure that even if you have all the talent and a very strong engineering culture, people need to know where to go. That's it. Thank you. I added some references, so later on the slides can be shared. And there's a lot of like, including the film article on McKinsey and all the comments that different people gave from it. It's definitely worth to read. Any questions? Shoot.
The IDE you include yourself, I guess it's one of the open source available ones, or did you develop something yourself?
It's a mix, a little bit of a mix of both. So we definitely start from an open source one. We actually start from the Coder one. Now I'm looking at Code Server one. We do add some other open source component to it. The biggest issue is like, or challenge, right? Technically is that if you want to enable Docker inside an online IDE, how do you do that without compromising the underlying nodes? Right? And that's a harder problem to solve. And if you want to know how that particular one is solved, you have to talk to that guy over there. So it's the biggest thing is not running a Visual Studio Code on there. It's how to enable certain capabilities and make sure it's safe and meets the security expectations.
I think we have two goals, making Docker work and making apt-get install work.
Shoot.
So I have a comment about your points on using different kind of tools for developers, data engineers, and all of these roles. I can really confirm this code, but there is something else from the point of view of HR management. When you lead a developer or data engineer with a certain number of tools and doing day after day same tasks, after some days, some months, this developer or data engineer become bored and keep searching for inventing something new. Maybe it's not necessary, of course, but he's trying his best or her best to introduce some new tools and technologies to improve him or herself as well. But who knows? It's not maybe not necessary. Based on your experience in these years, could you come up with a solution for this one as a kind of from different point of view?
No, so I'll rephrase the question. So if it's a little bit like if you standardize things, people like might get bored, and people are always looking to install new tools, and I think it's very natural to want to grow. I do think there's a couple of things you can always do. I think like what satisfies people. Growth is one thing, but also having a very clear purpose. Like I often see the opposite, where data engineers are playing with technology and they're doing a lot with technology, but they don't have a sense that they're actually bringing value to the organization. So it's a little bit finding that balance to the boat. So sometimes you see one side of the equation, the other one, sometimes you see the other side of the equation. So I think one thing is very important to make sure that the people working in data, that they are also see what value they're delivering to the organization, because it gives them a purpose to what they're doing. On the same side, you do have to create enough room for innovation. So it's not because you standardize anything, actually standardization helps you. Say you find a better way of doing things. Because it's standardized, it's way easier to refactor everything to this new way of working if everything was standardized before. So it's not because you standardize that you block innovation. I think you should still enable a certain level of innovation to happen all the time. And it's all about like where you put your standardization. If you make it really low and you said you can only use SQL with Snowflake, no, I hope I'm not. People might indeed, after a while, like if people don't feel a purpose or don't feel that they're bringing value to the organization, they will get demotivated. But you can also always come up with, there are always new things happening. Right? Like I'm saying, there's always a way to actually build libraries, to actually accelerate your organization. Gitbot was an innovation that did not happen originally in Conveyor. It actually happened by a platform team at a customer. Data contracts, it's something, there's always room for innovation. I think even if you standardize, there's so much improvement, and the road to where the Googles and the Netflixes are of this world in data is so long, and most companies, they're still at the very beginning. Even if they have some advanced capabilities, it's just a starting point. So if you're saying like, if you standardize everything, I think if you standardize everything, you're already at the Netflix and the Googles, and then you have scale challenges and they will feel motivated. Everybody else, they're way before that, and there's so many challenges. It's about looking at the balloons that are in the air and talking to the people around you about what challenges, what friction they're seeing, what they're missing in their day-to-day life, talking to business, like what they would like to accomplish, and then seeing like how you can use technology to actually deliver that value. I hope that answers your question.
Perhaps one question, Pascal. You talk about boundaries, and you
Yes.
also talk about big technical complexity
Yeah.
of a lot of tools.
Yeah.
So that resonates with me, putting on boundaries. What also resonated was what once said about data platforms and giving freedom to teams. And I know there is not a right answer, it's a balance, but where do you put the boundaries?
It's a tough question to answer, and I think it's not the same answer for every organization. I think it really depends about the capabilities of the people, and it's very much also related to the question that was asked. Right? So if you have a very, very strong technical team, you have to put your boundaries a little bit lower and let it go so there's enough room to move. If you have less skilled or less knowledgeable people, you want to make those boundaries a little bit narrow so people feel secure and know what to do and can grow. I also don't think those boundaries are always set in stone and they cannot change over time. So I can't give you a definite answer. It's really looking at the organization, their technology, and seeing where you want to draw certain boundaries.
Okay, thanks.